Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on these two bins right here. You can see how I arranged the plastic kind of cinched in from the edges to allow for some airflow around the plastic. I even took the same approach when I put these two systems away after feeding them last time. These are the oldest bins in which I've still got plastic coverings. All the older bins are off to the left here, and all of them have either gone to the point where they're covered in only paper or not even covered at all. And I guess that's an option in this pair of systems as well. These two systems were launched from the same source. So the worms that came out of these came from the same couple of bins that had been paired up previously. And then they got paired up, and there's as you can see, there was a launch date of December in the left bin, and there was a launch date of February in the right bin. And from that same source that these worms came from, I also launched off some buckets. Buckets that I don't really feature videos of very often, but I was just in those to check them. Well, let's go over there really quick, I'll show you. The last time we actually shot a video about these buckets was 20 days ago. And at that point, it seemed like it might be time to start gearing them up for relocating the worms into a new home. So I kind of classified that as the final feeding, bringing a close to the normal composting phase. And I've been more or less what I call, foraging in these bins for the past 20 days. And I just come back in here every so often. I just went through these and aerated them. And under the plastic coverings, you can see the material is really nice. But we're not here to check in on these systems. We're going to go back to the two bins, the two black bins, and we're going to get them fed. It's been 10 days, and I think that they're due. So let's get over there and take care of them. What I fed these systems last time was stuff that I imagined would go pretty quick. It was cabbage and cucumber peels, and as you can see, the stuff that they're getting today, an assortment of yummy fruits, is probably also going to go pretty quick. This watermelon, cantaloupe melon rinds, and some banana peels. Stuff was in the freezer, and as you can see, it's thawing out, and the humid air is even condensing on the cold material, making it look a little bit glossy, possibly even making it a little bit more damp than it would be otherwise. And I guess dampness is the main reason I had taken the extra step of taking these plastic coverings and arranging them in a way over the material in the bins that they didn't cover everything, that they would allow for a little bit of the moisture in the systems to escape out through evaporation. And if we start to sense that things are getting a bit too damp, way too damp, then we can always switch over to paper coverings here too. So we'll make that decision after we've gone through these bins to see how things are coming along. But you know what, before we till everything up, I think I'm most interested in seeing how a couple of test objects that were placed into these bins 125 days ago are progressing. Really quick, before I get both hands, well, theoretically my clean hand should stay clean, but the bin over here is the older one, 178 days of age, and the one right here, 143 days of age, fed 15 and 12 times respectively. 125 days now since we've been running a couple chunks of beach towel, just some cotton fabric, since worms will eat cotton fabric. And from what I remember, right there, that's where one of them is, and the other one is somewhere, oh no, outboard. Both of them were outboard from the middle, and the other one is right there. So the reason I'm able to tell that that's where they are is because they were so tiny, they were just a thread anymore. Little chunks of fabric still stuck to it. So I positioned them on top of a couple of mango seeds, which I figured would be the easiest thing to use as a position indicator to show where the fabric was. So since I'm not finding the threads, it's basically down to a thread anymore. Oh, this is it right here. I imagine that since it wasn't right on the seed anymore, it had to be in the material that I had brushed aside to get to the seed. And I believe that what we're really seeing here anymore is something that's not even going to go any further. Because for it to be one long, intact piece of thread like so, it's got to be some sort of a synthetic material that the worms are not going to be able to eat. So it'll probably just linger and remain as is in both of these bins. And maybe they'll just come back and they'll nibble off this little bit of remainder that's still showing on this one here. A little bit of cotton still stuck to this one. So it's not quite there yet, but when it is done, it's probably just going to look like this. Probably like a single thread of synthetic material. Perhaps that's what they use to sort of, sew up that edge, the edge that goes around the entire towel. And everything else is all cotton, which the worms have been able to eat for the most part. It's just that little bit of leftover material still lingering, stuck to the thread. And similarly, we've got another piece over here. Again, a piece kind of representative of how large the piece of fabric was originally, which wasn't all that big. It might have been maybe this big. But here too, I believe I'm still seeing little bits of remnant material still stuck to this piece of thread that the worms would still need to polish off before we can truly consider this as a completed test. If 125 days have passed to get to this point, I am curious how long it's going to take to get to the very end, where it's only that one piece of synthetic thread remaining. But there's still a little bit of work to go before it's all gone, but certainly not much. And I think the best bet is to keep it associated to these larger food items that are probably going to take quite some time before they're gone. So these mango seeds, definitely of interest to the worms that have kind of snuck inside the seed husk. Take advantage of that as sort of a little cubby hole hiding spot. And I'm starting to see a lot of, oops, did I just drop the fabric? No, it's right here under my finger. I'm definitely seeing a good number of springtails in here. Not as bad as I've seen in other systems, but perhaps more than I've seen in most of my systems. There is one system that has way more springtails running around in it than this one, and that's my bin of mixed worms. Somehow it seems like there's an environment in here that the springtails seem to favor as well. So I could see them in certain areas. They're pretty abundant. And as long as that they're kind of at this amount, as long as they don't exceed what we're seeing here, I really don't have too much of an objection to it. Because there's always going to be certain helper critters in your worm bins. There's going to be mites, there's going to be springtails, there's going to be other little creatures in there, depending on where you get your materials from. Perhaps if you're bringing leaves in from outside, you might end up with some other little creatures, pill bugs, isopods, whatever, in there that are all doing their part to help break down the materials that you're piling into the worm bin. And once in a while, the conditions start to veer in a direction that really favors an outbreak of those types of creatures. Here too I'm seeing a couple little spots where there's a whole lot of springtails gathering around something that's of interest to them. So my hope is that we don't see things go much beyond this. I think for a while now we have been observing a little bit of an outbreak here too, a little bit more than I'm used to seeing, but not really at a point where I'm going to sweat it. But I'm still going to call it out because I am sort of, I don't know, I got springtail on the brain because of that other system where it does seem like we're sort of in an outbreak situation. So now the foods they got last time, like I mentioned earlier, each system got a few chunks of cabbage. Not really the leaves so much, perhaps more like the stems or some of the thicker leaves that one wouldn't really eat. So 3 pretty good sized chunks of that, as well as a whole bunch of peels of cucumber. The peels of cucumber were small enough and sweet enough, I assume, that the worms have probably nibbled all that stuff away. I mean, cabbage too is just the sort of thing the worms really seem to gobble up, and especially when it's prepared the way I prepare it, which isn't really much preparing. It's just freezing, but in a way you are doing something other than just throwing it in there. Oh yeah, there's this unusual object here too, the cork, that I always sort of forget is there, and we always bump into it and we sort of just call it out briefly, but then life goes on. Cork is just one of those things that's going to take forever. It's been moving from bin to bin to bin over a number of years now, and probably will continue for many years before it's all gone, or before it breaks down to the point where it's not recognizable as a cork any longer. Okay, we've excavated a pretty decent size pit down in the middle of each of these systems so we can plop in today's delicious assortment of melon rinds. I got a feeling similar to the interval that we went with on this go around, 10 days between feedings. We might be ready to come back in here another 10 days because the stuff that they're getting today is certainly food that's going to go pretty quick. I've got bedding. It's my little tub over here of prepared bedding. Same stuff that you've already seen me pushing aside. It was used in the last feeding as well. It's this stuff here, shredded paper and cardboard combined with some leaves. And there's a little bit left from the last check-in, but we're gonna give them more. So let's, I don't know, usually I'm reluctant to reach into my bedding supply, thinking that I'm gonna transplant some little worms that might be attached to my glove into the bedding, and then they'd be happy in there for a while until they'd get moved over to some other system. All the worms that I'm seeing attached to my glove are very, very tiny worms, and I've been seeing that in a lot of my systems. That includes the yellow buckets. I was just in there, like I said before, to aerate the material in those systems, and similarly, as I was going through the stuff, little baby worms were sticking to my glove left and right. They were sticking to the walls of the buckets. So it does seem like we're in that time of year when the worms are reproducing and increasing their numbers. So things are getting warmer, and I believe that that's probably the key variable causing that to occur. I mean, those buckets were originally set up to be breeding environments, because they say that if you take a limited number of worms and place them into a fairly spacious home, then that'll sort of trip off a breeding response in the worms. You know, they could sense that there's room enough for more baby worms, and they go ahead and start trying to make more baby worms. So that's what I think is happening in most of my systems. I'm seeing lots of little baby worms all over the place, little itsy bitsy worms that are hardly even noticeable. They're so tiny. And those are the ones I worry about being stuck to my glove and then eventually falling off or just getting rinsed down the drain, and then that will be the end of them, which I would hate to see happen. So now the one thing we want to return back down into the feeding zone is the mango seed. In each case, still the spot where we're keeping that piece of fabric. Let me just pile on a little bit more bedding material here so that we're not placing those mango seeds onto frozen foods, creating a somewhat uncomfortable space for the worms hidden inside those mango seed husks. Stuff I'm sprinkling in here is pulverized eggshell, which is the material that I use as grit in my worm bins, because grit is something that the worms are able to make use of to help break down the foods that they're eating. And now I think we're ready to cover up. And I usually try to use this as a chance to kind of go beyond what I need to do to cover up the hole. I just bring in a whole bunch of material from the outer edges. That'll give us a chance to not only inspect the material, see how it's holding up, see how the moisture content is, but if it is getting clumpy or nasty, this is our chance to sort of break it up and aerate it. So stuff on the edge of that bin, on your edge closer to you, looked pretty good. It was in this bin that I felt like things towards the bottom were a little bit more damp than they need to be. I think it's the material in this bin it's giving me that feeling that we're on the borderline of possibly seeing things go from nice and crumbly to maybe sticky and gooey and muddy. So I believe that, at least in this bin, but since they're paired up bins, I believe we're just going to treat them equally. I believe the time has come to do away with the plastic coverings and switch over to paper, so that, mainly for the sake of this system right here, we have the opportunity to kick off some of the moisture content that's down in the bin and try to ward off the I don't know. To me, it seems like something that's best avoided versus needing to recover from it. Seems to me like when things in the worm bin just get overly damp and muddy and sticky, it's not a favorable environment. It's hard to maintain. I don't think the worms can make use of all that material since it's all stuck together. It does seem like it's a unfavorable condition in a worm bin, and it does seem like if you can identify a system that's leading towards that early and nip it in the bud, that is the best bet, and I believe that's exactly the situation we're in right here. In the other bin, it probably wouldn't have been so important to switch from plastic coverings to something porous, something breathable, but I think for the sake of this system here, we're going to benefit by doing so. And it's also probably going to help that I'm bringing out the really damp stuff that's down low and bringing it up to the surface where it might have a chance at losing some of its moisture content and evaporate. Some of the stuff that was out on this top surface that was already a little bit drier, by being out on the surface, will also be blended in the process, helping to equalize the moisture content in this stuff throughout. So this is, I believe, one of the main reasons there's value in kind of going through the material in your bins and inspecting it and tilling it up and aerating it, because if you do start to sense that the material is going from nice and crumbly and loose to muddy and sticky and clumping together and nasty, that's your chance to make adjustments and try to steer things onto the road to recovery versus just letting it spiral out of control, becoming a big nasty mess. So I'm not prepared with paper coverings for these systems, but it's easy enough to go grab a couple sheets of newspaper that we could put on here in the place of the plastic. And the plastic has a certain amount of material adhering to it right now, so I'll probably leave these two bins out on the bench so that I can come back at a later time today after that material on those plastic sheets is dried enough that I can just flake it off and drop it back down into these bins, and then I can put everything away and not have a whole bunch of nice castings material stuck to those plastic sheets. That's what I'll do sometimes when I demote plastic coverings from being on my bins. I'll usually want to reclaim anything that's stuck to them, and I'll also make sure that there's no worms stuck to them either, because that happens sometimes as well. So let me take a quick break here and go grab a couple sheets of newspaper with which we can cover up, and then we'll be finished. Yeah, very nice. Bins are coming along good. Let's just clean up all these little bits stuck on the edges, and then we can cover up. Okay, good. Alright, here we go. As you can see, I've been trying to use my paper top coverings a little differently than I've done in the past, where I try to go really all the way around the edges, so much so that there's even a little extra material that kind of curls up around the edge, presumably limiting the amount of airflow and permitting a little bit of the moisture to really stay in the system versus having it all just freely evaporate away. And you know, in this system it almost feels like we should really promote even more drying, but you know, I think these systems are still young enough. They're not even 200 days of age yet. I think we've got time to recover. And the material was starting to feel like it would clump together and become a bit nasty, but I got a feeling if we start now with, you know, letting the stuff air out a little bit, we'll be in good shape. Let's not forget, we did put some stuff in here, watermelon, cantaloupe melon, stuff that is going to also introduce some extra moisture into the system. So what we did here as far as changing the top coverings, I think is going to help us. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.